Welcome to the 5th week of Stress Less. We're going to start off with an icebreaker question. So go ahead and have someone read the icebreaker question and take a few minutes for everyone to share the response. When you're done with that, go ahead and read through the what to expect section. So go ahead and press pause on your DVD and enjoy your icebreaker discussion. Well, I hope you enjoyed that icebreaker. Next, we're going to get into our teaching for today, so make sure you have a pen, get ready to take some notes, and let's take a look at this.
And as you might imagine, the Bible is just full of hope. But what might surprise you is that the Bible is also full of failures who needed hope. I'm talking about page after page of people like you and me who were packing suitcases of regret, deep regret, that kept them up all night. I'm talking about strong people who blew it, courageous people who wilted under the pressure, faithful people who were at times were less than faithful, people who wrecked relationships and cheated families and dishonored their friends and really disappointed God. People who thought that they were totally washed up, that they'd gone too far. They thought, you know what, I've really done it this time, man. I'm never going to recover from this. People like us. One of those guys was a man named Peter. His name was actually Simon, but Jesus gave him the nickname Peter, Petros, which meant the rock or Rocky. Before there was Dwayne Johnson or Sylvester Stallone, there was Petros. And everything we know about this professional fisherman suggests that he was a tough guy. I'm talking a big, broad-shouldered guy, the kind of dude with calloused hands and an outdoor face. He was just rugged and ripped. Just think like Gene with sandals. Well, maybe not. Anyway, Peter was this great guy with a great big heart, but he was also very impulsive, and he was loud, and he was bold and strong-willed and very opinionated, and the first one to stand up and express that opinion. On one occasion, Jesus was talking to his inner circle, the 12 disciples. He said, guys, listen, people are saying all kinds of stuff about me. Who do you say that I am? And Peter doesn't do like a public opinion poll, doesn't conduct a focus group. He just stands up and blurts out, I say this, you're the Christ, you're the Messiah, you are the Son of the living God. And Jesus smiles and says, you're something else, man. You are so blessed, Rocky. And on this rock solid truth of what you just said, I'm going to build my church. Peter was the rock, man. He was strong, committed, bold, and brave. At least he thought he was. It's been kind of cool to watch his story unfold on AD, the Bible, the television series that's going on right now on Sunday nights. I hope you're kind of following along with that. Some of you know the story of how Jesus and his guys had just finished their last meal together in this upper room, and then, minus Judas, they all went out to a place called the Mount of Olives. And it's there that Jesus says to the remaining 11 disciples, guys, this very night, all of you are going to fall away on account of what's going to happen to me. And Peter, in his prideful self-confidence, he kind of thumps his chest and says, not a chance. Even if all these guys fall away, I will not run. I will never bail on you. These other guys might because they're weak, but I'm like a rock. Like a rock. Starts doing Bob Seger on Jesus. And he said, you gave me that name yourself. You know I'm a rock. And Jesus says, well, here's the truth, Rocky. This very night, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. You're going to have a chance to stand up for me. And you're going to lie about even knowing me. And Peter says, there is no way. Even if I have to die with you, I would never disown you. See, I think the toughest failures to get over are the ones that we pridefully declare would never happen to us. This is why this verse has always been such a great reminder to me. It comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 10. It says, don't be so naive and self-confident. You're not exempt. You could fall flat on your face as easily as anyone else. That verse is saying, man, if you think you're so strong that you would never fall, that you would never blow it. You would never break your marriage vows. You would never make a shady business deal. You would never disappoint your kids. You would never lie to your parents and cover your tracks. You would never turn your back on your best friend. You would never take a spiritual nosedive. It's saying if you think that, you are so naive, and in your prideful self-confidence, you are in more danger than those who believe that all that is actually possible. That's what makes the Titanic one of the most famous failures in history. Because the visionaries, the creators, the engineers of this incredible luxury liner were certain that this was one ship that would never sink. 26,000-ton hull was believed to be indestructible as it left port for its fateful voyage. A passenger, Mrs. Albert Caldwell, asked a deckhand, "Is this ship really unsinkable?" The crew member replied, "Lady, God himself couldn't sink this ship." So no one could have imagined the nightmare when on its maiden voyage, this unsinkable ship plunged to the bottom of the North Atlantic at 2:20 a.m. on April 15th, 1912, taking 1,500 passengers and crew to their death. See, the most staggering failures in life are the ones you thought would never happen to the unsinkable you. And when they do, man, you're left to wonder if you'll ever resurface again. And that's how we find Peter after the crucifixion of Jesus. In John chapter 21, we find Peter on a boat. It's not a luxury liner in the North Atlantic, this small fishing boat on the Sea of Tiberias. And the boat itself is very stable. He's the one that's not. He's drowning in a sea of regret. Probably like we do, just replaying that event over in his mind, over and over in his mind, asking, how in the world could I have done something like that? You see, right after Peter had bragged about being strong, about being loyal, unsinkable, in his devotion to Jesus, on the night that Jesus was arrested and led away to stand trial before the high priest Caiaphas, Peter follows from a distance, and he sits down to warm himself by this charcoal fire there in Caiaphas's courtyard. He's in this crowd of people, but because it's kind of a dangerous climate, he's trying to lay low. And somebody recognizes him and says, "Hey, you're one of that Galileans, the guy from Nazareth, Jesus. You're one of his followers." Peter goes, I don't know who you're talking about. Somebody else goes, "Yeah, I've seen you too. I've seen you with him. You're one of his followers." He goes, "I don't know who you're talking about. I don't know the guy." And then somebody else says, "Yes, I can tell by your accent. You're from Galilee also." And Peter starts to swear. He starts to curse and cuss and says, "I don't know who you're talking about." And a rooster crows. Luke 22 just, I think, includes a really, really poignant phrase. It simply says, Jesus turned and looked at Peter. Can you imagine what that would have been like? And Peter runs away and just collapses in a pile of shame. This big manly dude cries his heart out. No longer bold, no longer committed and courageous, not even remotely close to being "I will die for you" kind of friend. So I'm guessing as he floats there in this little fishing boat, every time he closes his eyes, he's not sleeping. He's replaying that moment, standing around that fire, looking through the smoke, right into the disappointed eyes of his best friend, Jesus. And this guy feels so worthless, so trashed, so embarrassed, so guilty, thinking, man, if I could only do that over. Can you guys relate to any of this? See, I think every one of us has floated in a boat called failure at one time or another. Some of you are riding in it right now. And it really is the thing that's keeping you up at night. You can't sleep. You can't shut it down. You can't get it out of your mind. You feel sunk, you feel deflated, you feel ashamed, you feel embarrassed, and you wonder if you'll ever resurface again. Some of you are thinking, man, I've messed up everything. I have destroyed my relationship with my spouse, or I've gambled away our savings. My addictions have cost me my career. My impulsiveness has cost me my reputation, my ministry. My kids may never speak to me again. My folks will never trust me again. I've betrayed my best friend's trust. I've really broken God's heart. How can I ever resurface from my failures and find renewed hope and purpose? Is there a way for me to rise above my embarrassment and my guilt and my shame and all my regret? Well, the good news is, yes, there is. And looking at the experience of Peter, I think there's at least three things that this guy does right. I think the same things hold true for any of us who need to resurface from our failures. And the first one is this. I love it. He owned his failure. He owned it. I want you to see what he did. Matthew 26, verse 75 says, "Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken. Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and he wept bitterly." There's a couple of things in there. First of all, he remembered the word of the Lord. He said to himself, you know what? Jesus said this would happen. He was right. I was wrong. I said I'd never fall. He said I would. I said I'd never lie. He said I would. I said I'd never run. He said I would. He was right. I was wrong. Have you guys discovered the power of those 3 words? I was wrong. Been a while since you've said it. Look what it says in Proverbs chapter 28, verse 13. It says, "A man or a woman who refuses to admit their mistakes can never be successful, but if they confess them and forsake them, they get another chance." And that's what Peter does. He just owns it. He admitted his failure, and he was broken by it, and the once proud rock was reduced to a pile of rubble, and this big guy goes out and he just weeps bitterly. He owned it. But I love this quote from Dr. Seuss. "You have brains in your head. You have feet in your shoes. You can steer yourself any direction you choose." That's a smart guy right there. He's talking about ownership. He's talking about assuming responsibility for your own life. Saying no one will live your story for you. And if you want to break free from failure, you want to break free from regret and live the kind of life that God has always dreamed that you could live. I'm talking about a life full of joy and passion and purpose and adventure and risk and faith and love and authenticity and freedom. Then you have to apply those 3 words to your life. I own it. Remember, you cannot blame your way to freedom. You just can't. You got to say, I own it. You know, I think there's a couple of words that keep so many people stuck. And I've used them too. The 2 words are, yeah, but. You know something's not quite right. You know you kind of blown it or whatever. But then you respond with, yeah, but. And then comes this endless flow of excuses and rationalizations and finger pointing and blame. Yeah, but you don't know. Yeah, but you don't understand. Yeah, but if they hadn't have done this. Yeah, but if they hadn't have done that. And you listen to that long enough, you just want to kick them in the yeah, but. You know what I'm talking about? And that's why I'm not a good counselor right there. But you can't blame your way to freedom. You have to say, I own it. And I love that Peter did that. He took ownership and he wept bitterly. You ever been that broken over your sin and failure? There's a big difference between being miserable and being broken. I was talking to a mom of a 23-year-old guy who was caught in the grip of a meth addiction, and she told me that she had tears streaming down her face. She says, my son is so messed up. He got into a bunch of trouble. He is so broken. And then she went on to tell me how he continues to steal and lie and con and manipulate and refuses to go to a recovery group or rehab. And I said to her, ma'am, I want to say this to you with as much grace and love as I can. Your son is not broken. He's just miserable. And there's a big difference. See, you can be really sorry that you got caught. You can be absolutely miserable that you're having to live now with the consequences of your behavior. Or you can drop your pride, humble yourself, own your stuff, be genuinely remorseful, and ask the God of grace to help you because he wants to. James chapter 4 says, God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. So humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. He will lift you up when you humble yourself and own your stuff. There's a second thing that Peter does that's kind of subtle, kind of between the lines, but I think it's so healthy, so wise, and such a good move for any of us that want to resurface from our failure. He stayed in the group. He stayed in the group. When we find Peter in that little fishing boat, he's not fishing by himself. He's there with his old fishing buddies. He goes right back to what he knew best. And we do that too, don't we? We go back to what do we knew best before the failure? So Peter climbs in this boat with James and John and Thomas and Nathaniel and a couple of other guys, and 7 of them go fishing together. which made me think how all of us need some good friends who know they're in the same boat. Peter was wise enough to stay in the group. In fact, right after Peter admitted his failure and went out and wept bitterly about it, we find him right back in the group. He's hiding out in the upper room with the rest of the guys, because guess what happened? Jesus was right about them too. All of them would shrink back. They all would run away that night. Now Peter is back on the fishing team with these guys, which made me think just a few minutes ago, didn't we all admit that we're all in the same boat? It's amazing how most of us are like the rest of us. That's just true. And that's one of the things I love about places like Eastside. It's just a place where no perfect people are allowed. You know, it's a me too kind of culture. I mean, if you think you have failed miserably and you have a bunch of regret, I guarantee you, if you turn to the person next to you and told them, they'd say, yeah, me too. It's a wonderfully healing thing when you surround yourself with good people who understand where you are because they've been there too, and they can point you to the same hope and the same grace that they're discovering. There's power in the group. Stay in the group. Sometimes I'll run into people I haven't seen at church for a while. I'll say, man, missed you. Where you been? I'll say, well, been going through a really hard time. I say, so, like, where you been? Don't ever let failure isolate you. Stay in the group. A lot of people start to think, oh man, after what I've done, there is no way I could ever show my face around there again. You are so wrong. We're all on the same boat. Stay in the group. Well, I have no place in a worship service after all the dark things I've done. No, stay in the group. Well, I'm too embarrassed. I'm too ashamed. No, stay in the group. Well, my friends won't accept me now. Then they aren't true friends. You stay in the group because there is healing in the group. Ecclesiastes 4. A wise man wrote these words down in his journal called Ecclesiastes. He says, if one person fails, the other can reach out and what? Help. But people who are alone when they fall are in real what? So you want help, you want trouble. We all fall down. We all fall down. Stay in the group. There's one more thing that Peter did right. Anybody who wants to resurface from regret and failure, anybody who wants to find peace and hope and joy again, they got to do the same thing. He dove in and swam toward Jesus. Now here's the scene. Peter is floating this little fishing boat with his buddies. They're about 100 yards offshore. It's around sunrise, and they can see this dimly lit figure standing there on the beach. And this guy on the beach shouts to them, hey, you guys caught any fish? That's not a great question to ask fishermen, especially if they haven't caught any fish. And they go, not really. He says, well, throw your nets on the right side of the boat. And they're thinking, well, what do we got to lose? So they do, and the nets get so full of fish. And John is the one that remembers the exact same thing happening 3 years prior, the first time they met Jesus. And John yells, it's the Lord. And before he can even get Lord out of his mouth, Peter has jumped overboard. And he's swimming toward Jesus. And I think in jumping out of that boat, he would say, man, I have thought about this long enough. I'm tired of feeling like this. I'm cold. I'm hungry. I'm miserable in my self-perceived uselessness. I'm ready to let go of my regret. I am ready to throw all this junk overboard. I want to leave my past behind. I got to swim to Jesus. And I would love to have a picture of that scene. There's Peter standing there about ankle deep in water. His chest is heaving because he's been swimming so frantically. Got water dripping from his hair and his beard, and he's standing there by a charcoal fire once again. He's looking through the smoke once again. But this time, he locks eyes with forgiveness. Let me remind you whose eyes Peter was looking into. He was looking into the same eyes of a friend he just betrayed a few days earlier. He was looking into the eyes of a man who still had puncture marks on his forehead from a crown of thorns. He was looking into the eyes of a man who still had nail marks, spike marks in his hands and feet that held him to a Roman cross. Peter was looking through that smoke into the eyes of the one who had died for his sin and his failure. And on this beach, on this new day, he was looking through the fire into the hope-filled eyes of the resurrected Jesus. As they locked eyes, Jesus asked him, Peter, do you love me? Peter said, Lord, you know I love you. You know how many times Jesus asked him that? Yeah, 3 times. The exact same number that Peter denied knowing Jesus. I think he was saying, just so you get it, you know. When Jesus asked him, do you love me? The word that Jesus used in the text is the word agape, which is that God-like, sacrificial, I will die for you kind of love, unfailing love. He says, do you love me? Peter responds with the word phileo, which is a brotherly kind of love. And I think in doing that, Peter was saying, you know what, I'm not about to make the same boastful claim I just made. I'm not capable of that kind of love. But I will love you like a brother. I will love you with all I got, as imperfect as it might be. But yes, I love you, Lord. And Jesus says, well, if you love me like that, I'm going to use you to change this world, Peter. Peter, you might have flamed out and failed, but I died and rose so that your regrets could be dead and buried in Rocky. I still believe in you. And with those words, Peter resurfaced, and this colossal failure became one of the greatest success stories in history. With incredible courage and humility, he helped launch the Church of Jesus Christ and spread it around the world. The guy who thought that God was through with him went on to become one of the biggest difference makers who ever walked this planet. Eastside is here today because of that guy. So Peter would tell you and I today, if a guy like me can rise up from where I've been, you can rise up too, because God is love. You can rise up from your shame and depression and hopelessness. You can rise up from addictions and destructive habits. You can rise up from guilt and regret and failure. You can rise up from grief and heartbreak and abuse and painful memories. You can rise up out of darkness and run into the brilliant light of the resurrected Jesus and lock eyes with forgiveness, because God is love and His grace is amazing. I want you to see this scripture. Check out this scripture. Praise be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In His great mercy, He has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, and into an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade, kept in heaven for you. Did you check out who wrote that? Yeah. An old fisherman named Peter, who owned his stuff, stayed in the group, and dove in and swam toward Jesus.
Well, now it's time for our group discussion questions. Go ahead and turn off your DVD and begin reading through your discussion questions in your guide. We'll see you next week for session 6 of our Stress Less small group study.